Sad news coming out of Los Angeles. This was reported on last night. We covered it a little bit. We now have more information and confirmation. An elderly Jewish man, pro-Israel, was assaulted and killed by a pro-Palestinian protester. 65-year-old Jewish man in LA was killed. But this story isn't just about the horrifying news that took place in California. It's about how the media reported it. It's about how the media is currently reporting it. And it's about how they frame everything in this country as the right is the real threat. Many of you may be wondering, or have asked yourself this. How is it that when you watch a channel like Timcast or Steven Crowder, for instance, you hear so much about what the far left is doing, yet they keep acting at an institutional level like there's no real threat from the far left? Take a look at the Anti-Defamation League's heat map. Everything's right-wing. Oh, they got some left-wing stuff up on there. Some things notably absent. The framing is everything. Appearing on the Culture War podcast, Stephen Marsh, who wrote the book The Next Civil War, said that there are more seditionists on the right than on the left. I believe that is, in my personal opinion, incorrect in its framing. But if his statement was there are more extremists on the right than there are on the left, maybe, I don't know. I think it's probable that there are more extremists on the left and more seditionists on the left than the right. However, the right extremists and seditionists are more lethal. That's been one assessment that I've seen that I thought was actually kind of fair. Why is it that law enforcement focuses more on the right? While there may be substantially more far leftists, what we tend to see is what I refer to as blunt terror versus acute terror, meaning that right ideologically aligned ideas or I hate to say right, but typically more traditional views, or however you describe it, it's hard to describe. Anti-left or non-left. They're extremely violent, extremely direct. The left, however, has a wide range of what I refer to as blunt terror, in that people getting punched in the face, people getting beaten up, people getting attacked in the street, people getting fired from their jobs. These are not extreme lethal threats, but they become persistent because the media doesn't care. But I think the other truth here that must be brought up is not only that, look, I think it's fair to say the media is not going to report at the national level that a guy got punched in the face. But this story right here is a really good example of it. A far leftist, a pro-Palestinian protester, actually, I don't know if they're far leftist, they're pro-Palestine, there's a distinction, reportedly struck an elderly Jewish man with a megaphone, knocking him down. He hit his head and he died. The media has reported it. They've reported that a man fell and died. That's it. Elderly man falls, hits his head, and dies, despite the fact that a medical examiner has said it was a homicide, meaning human killed human. I think what we know and what we see from the media and how they treat this, and what we see from these large institutions about how they downplay far left extremism, it is all about a narrative and ideology. Before we get started, my friends, click the link in the description below and go watch Infringed, the latest documentary by Lauren Southern, produced by Timcast Media, presented by Timcast Media, with the excellent work of Lauren Southern and John Dutoit. I got to tell you, there's a section in this, in the back, that talks about far left ideology and Nazism, fascism, how they disarm and kill people. And my fear is this is the point, to make you terrified of the far right boogeyman, because it is always framed this way. The far right gun violence. They ignore what's going on in Chicago. They ignore what the far left does. Does the ADL have in their list of extremist plots and terror anything related to the far left autonomous zones and the shootouts and murders? Well, a cursory glance, I go through this map, I don't find anything. Click the link in the description below. Check out Infringed. It is amazing. It's really fun. It's fun. It's funny. It's informative. Share the doc with your friends. We are going to win this culture war. Let's talk about this story right here. We have more news from the post-millennial. Sheriff rules death of elderly Jewish man in LA a homicide. Pro-Palestinian agitator considered person of interest. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office has released information on their death investigation into Paul Kessler, a Jewish man who died after sustaining injuries on Sunday during an altercation with an anti-Israel protest in Westlake in LA. Footage of the aftermath of the altercation emerged on social media, showing Kessler laying on the sidewalk in a pool of his own blood after suffering a head injury. He was taken away in an ambulance and later died. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office is investigating the incident and has not ruled out the possibility of a hate crime. Wow. Upon arrival at the intersection of Westlake and Thousands Oaks Boulevard, responding deputies located Kessler, who was suffering from a head injury. Witness accounts indicated that Kessler was involved in a physical altercation with a counter-protester. During the altercation, Kessler fell backwards and struck his head on the ground. Kessler was transported to an area hospital for advanced medical treatment. An autopsy performed by the medical examiner determined the cause of death to be blunt force head injury and the manner of death homicide. The sheriff's office states the incident appears to be isolated and not part of a large effort. Now, this is the important part. This is where they come in and say, it is not far left extremism. Not at all. What do you think would happen if a conservative individual struck a leftist, an elderly person, and killed them? They would call it a hate crime. Look what happened with Jussie Smollett. The bias is obvious. But let's go through this. As I mentioned, Stephen Marsh, I think I forgot to go into details. Stephen Marsh said that there are more seditionists on the right than the left. I asked him for what does he base this? And he said court cases. Okay. When a pro-Palestine extremist, perhaps they're not far left, kills a person, are they going to list this as a hate crime? They're saying maybe. Maybe they do. Are they going to call it political extremism? They probably won't. Let's read more and we'll get into this. Photos shared to social media by Christina Buttons, who stated that she got the images from a source who was on the scene, showed both Kessler before and after he was injured, as well as an elderly man sitting on a curb being questioned by police, pointing to a megaphone that lies next to a Palestinian flag. It had been alleged in early reporting that Kessler had been hit over the head with the megaphone by an anti-Israel protester. Kessler was waving an Israeli flag. Now, that may or may not be the case, but the medical examiner is determining this is a homicide. After Kessler was removed in an ambulance, those protesting for Palestinians and Hamas against Israel began chanting again. Buttons reported police had to move them away from the area where Kessler had lain on the sidewalk, his blood still fresh. So I've got some tweets for you. Yasher Ali says, update on the death of Paul Kessler, the elderly Jewish man who died today. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office says the medical examiner has ruled his death a homicide. The sheriff was first alerted to the incident when citizens called to report a battery had occurred. Likely what had happened and how it's determined. So you say he fell on his head. How can they say that was a homicide? Simple. He has damage to the front portion of his face or somewhere on his head consistent with a blunt strike, which resulted in him falling down and hitting his head. If the medical examiner can see evidence of force used against him, and then he fell, or there's video and witness testimony, then he's going to say, this man died because he was attacked. Homicide does not mean murder. It means a death as the result of another. So, I think it's side is the death and hama is the prefix, is the descriptor. So you have a whole bunch of descriptors, regicide being one of my favorite words. That is the killing of royalty. Homicide means a human killed a human. Often you'll see, and suicide being self-harm. So often you'll see reports that this was ruled a homicide. It doesn't mean anyone's being charged with murder. It doesn't mean that anyone committed murder. It just means the death is the result of a human being. They say a 69-year-old man identified as Paul Kessler died as a result of injuries sustained during an altercation at a pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian event, both of which were occurring simultaneously at the intersection of Westlake Boulevard and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. The Ventura County Sheriff's Office is investigating the incident and has not ruled out the possibility of a hate crime, which is to say, they're like, hey, this dude killed this guy. Might even be a hate crime. Multiple citizens called the Ventura County's communication center to report a battery had occurred at the intersection. The intersection was the location of the event. Upon arrival, responding deputies located Kessler, who was suffering from a head injury. Witness accounts indicated that Kessler was involved in a physical altercation with counter-protesters. During the altercation, Kessler fell backwards and struck his head on the ground. Kessler was transported to an area hospital for advanced medical treatment. An autopsy was performed on November 6th, and the Ventura County medical examiners determined it was blunt force head injury and the manner of death a homicide. It's an active and ongoing investigation, and the incident appears to be isolated. So what we had heard is that he was struck with a megaphone. Now here's Chaya Rychik. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. She says NBC stealth edited this article after backlash They initially reported it as a Jewish man just died after hitting his head, leaving out that he was actually killed by a pro-Palestinian protester. I believe this is the account, the creator of Libs of TikTok, of course. And here's the first story from NBC News. Man dies after hitting head during Israel and Palestinian rallies in California, officials say. Sure, they did say that, but they also said it was a homicide. Jeez. Look, they even mentioned he was in a confrontation. They changed it. Good. Jewish man killed in altercation at dueling pro-Israel, pro-Palestinian rallies. This is the Daily Mail's home index page. Pictured, flag-waving Jewish man who fell and died after altercation. Really? Really? And you wonder why it is that there are only court cases about the right? Absolutely incredible. But don't get me wrong. They are fixing these headlines because of our pressure, because people are pushing back. Here we go. Jewish Paul Kessler, minutes before he was attacked with a megaphone and killed in a, quote, hate crime in California streets. That's the new headline. That's the new headline. Here's more. End Wokeness says, an old Jewish man was murdered by a pro-Palestine activist. The medical examiner already ruled it a homicide. This is the media coverage. I want to push back a little bit. Homicide does not mean murder, but it looks like it may actually end up under the murder law. I mean, murder is trending. It's crazy. This story is taking over. You physically attack someone, and if it is a hate crime, it's going to be murder. Like, I mean murder in the literal sense, like it's probably second-degree murder. Here you go. Here's CNN. Man in California dies after suffering head injury at pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian demonstrations. Oh, really? Here's NBC News. Jewish man dies after hitting head in altercation. The New York Times. Jewish man dies after altercation. This is incredible. NBC4. Jewish man dies from injuries suffered in Israel-Palestine rally in Westlake Village. Now, why do it? Why phrase everything this way? We have another story for you. 78-year-old British war veteran selling puppies for Remembrance Day, punched and kicked by Palestinian activists. In the documentary Infringed, there's a great scene. Click the link in the description below. Watch the documentary. We're gonna push this one. We're really excited for it. Lauren Southern did a great job. Lauren goes to Berkeley and asks people, do you want to ban guns? And she meets a guy who says, no. And she's like, what? And he's like, well, I'm a gay Republican, so. And she's like, do you feel safe? And he goes, not really. This is the fascinating thing. If you go to a Christian neighborhood, and I was talking to Stephen Marsh about this, and he was adamant that there are neighborhoods in this country, right-wing neighborhoods, where if you go, you will feel unsafe or whatever. And I'm just like, let me give you a riddle, my friends. Now, Stephen Marsh, let me clarify first. I think he's a good dude. I think he's wrong. I think he's good in a certain sense. I think he's really bad in a lot of ways. He was defending giving adult content to children, to minors, and I think that's very dangerous, bad, and gross. But I think he's good in the sense that he's willing to have these conversations. That's what I mean. He's a good dude. He'll come and sit down and explain these things, and we need people who have horrible views to explain them. I think he has horrible views. But I forgot where I was going with that one. In the conversation, we are talking about, yes, that's right, neighborhoods where he says they're right when you feel unsafe. I don't believe him. And I'll give you a riddle to break it down. It's one of my favorite riddles. You are walking down the road when you come to a fork on your left and your right. One leads to salvation and one damnation. Or we can simplify it and say one is going to bring you to a beautiful field of fruits and vegetables and a local village. The other will lead you to a dangerous rocky terrain in a barren desert where you will likely die. You certainly want to take the route towards the safe location. There is a man standing at each road. One always tells the truth and one always lies. You don't know which one is which. How do you figure out which road is the correct road if you don't know? The riddle is actually relatively simple. You ask either one of them what the other would say, and you do the opposite. So that is, if the guy on the left is always going to lie, and the guy on the right is always going to tell the truth, you ask the liar, what's the guy on the right going to say? Well, the guy on the right would tell you the correct direction, but he's a liar. So he's going to claim the guy is going to tell you the wrong direction. You ask the guy who tells the truth, and he's going to tell you. That liar is going to tell you the wrong direction. Either way, you do the opposite. It's an excellent little algorithm test. But the reason I bring that up is because this is what we experience with the left. This is what we experience with the media. When Stephen Marsh says that there are neighborhoods where they're Christians and if you go there, they'll attack you. Yeah, that's the guy who always tells the lie. That's what I see. And when you talk to, and let's be clear, the left tells the truth sometimes, the right lies sometimes, but it's tendencies. What we refer to as the right is an eclectic bunch of varying ideology, but the media lumps everyone together. They call Ian Crossland a conservative. They call me right wing. And I bring guests in, they're like, you're right wing. You're not right wing. You're like a centrist. Well, that doesn't exist to the left. And that's the point. So when you constantly hear all of these stories about the far right extremism, here we go. Outrage as UPenn Jr. passionately endorses Hamas. Do you think the Anti-Defamation League is going to track this one? I got to be honest. They might. Why? Because it's anti-Israel. But when the far left went out in the Summer of Love and smashed and destroyed, and it was a mass death incident, I'm going to say that again because the media is not reporting it. The Summer of Love riots was a mass death incident in the United States. It's estimated between, I think, like 26 to 36 dead. Yeah, that's a mass death incident. The problem? The deaths happened all over the country. And while there were some shocking scenes in viral videos, such as the death of David Dorn, the media does not treat it like extremist terrorist murders, despite the fact it is. Why? Because they align with that extremism. Here you go. FBI investigates after fifth suspicious letter containing white power found at Seattle synagogue. What do we get from the ADL? The ADL claims white supremacists are cheering for this. They're not. That's insane. The actual white supremacists that you'll talk to in this country, you know what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you they like Israel. Not all of them, but typically the more prominent ones will tell you that the idea of an ethno-state enforcing its borders and ethnic majority is a good thing. Why? It's what they want. It's an identitarian ideology. So what they do is they'll lie and they'll say right wing, right wing. It's the dirty game they play. Let's see what we can pull out. Here we go. I thought this was interesting. A lethal threat, why the far right sees more scrutiny than the far left from Military Times. And what do they say? They say, of course, the right is more dangerous. They say that they look at the court cases. Right, there were charges, 353 plots from the right that caused 147 deaths. In the same time frame, far left extremists carried out 126 plots or attacks, killing 23. You see, that proves it. Okay. Well, I think we need a comprehensive review, an overview of who's being charged and who's not being charged. Right now, an elderly man was just killed by a pro-Palestinian group. You know what they'll probably say? They'll probably say that's a jihadist, not far left. Despite the fact that many on the far left actually align very heavily with this. Fine, so be it. Here's the Anti-Defamation League's heat map. They show you extremist incidents. I've chosen 2020 to 2023, which would include the Summer of Love protests. Extremist murders. That's strange. I don't see Minnesota. I don't see St. Louis. I don't see Seattle. That's weird. Hey, wait a minute. I do see Portland, Oregon. Let's pull up the list. Yes. You have two right-wing incidents in 2023 and 2022. 2022? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This is the total country. Now, we got to go to Oregon. There we go. Now we're in Oregon. Now I'll pull up the list. Okay. Right-wing extremist murder in 2022. Opened fire at a group of left-wing protesters gathering near his Portland, Oregon home to hold the protest at a park. Smith killed one person and wounded 5 others before one of the protesters shot and incapacitated him. Smith's internet postings revealed racism, anti-Semitism, and other far-right ideas. Well, that's certainly not good. I'm glad this individual was stopped. Well, hold on. Extremist murder. Left wing. Here we go. Michael Reinl, an Antifa activist, shot to death a member of a right-wing extremist group during a protest in Portland. Let me break that down for you. An activist killed an extremist. That's what they said. Who was, what do they call him? Jay? Was it Aaron Danielson? I forget his name. Sorry. Literally, sorry. I probably should know his name. I believe that was it. He was just a Trump supporter. What right-wing extremist group? What? Michael Reinl, the murderer, who for no reason walked up to a Trump supporter and executed him in the street, is an activist. Ask yourself why it is So when Stephen Marsh says that there are more court cases involving the right, that proves it. Then when we see the murders that we've seen, why isn't it far-left extremism when the George Floyd riots resulted in 30-plus deaths? Why is it that white supremacist events, white supremacist propaganda, anti-LGBTQ, and anti-Semitic incidents all have their own categories, terrorist plots? But where's anti-white propaganda? Where's critical race theorists? Where's far-left extremism? Where's Antifa? Hey, wait a minute. Antifa was firebombing the federal courthouse. Isn't that terrorism? For 3 months straight. And this is the point we all understand. While the ADL does begrudgingly track some of this, the FBI is clearly ignoring it. Or they won't charge these individuals, despite the fact that we know the far left is engaged in terroristic activities based on their political ideology. White supremacy is listed by the ADL, but you don't end up seeing, like, I don't know, the shooter in Nashville. What about that one? Anti-white propaganda. Okay. Tennessee. What is this? Crossville, Tennessee. Right wing. Well, hold on there a minute. Nashville. I don't understand. Nashville's not even listed? We're talking about 2023. There were no extremist murders in Nashville? Now hold on there a minute, ADL. The manifesto was just released, but even without it, an extremist went into a school and killed children. Doesn't that qualify? No. You see the game? We now know that the Nashville shooter was motivated, at least in part, by anti-white sentiment. Anti-white and also some critical theory Marxist ideology. Candace Owens has a tweet saying there's more to the story. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Rumor is the individual was motivated by a lot of things and seemed to be just be crazy. But either way, why isn't this terrorist listed on the ADL's heat map? Right. Because they often omit and obfuscate. And the FBI won't release information on why some individuals who engaged in terrorism, why they did. You see how the game is being played. So as you look to the media reporting on this elderly man who was murdered, it would seem, understand they're not going to call the deaths from the far-left extremists terror. And when they don't, they'll compile a list saying, see, only the right engages in terror. And that's the dirty game they play. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out. Check out Infringed at timcast.com, and we'll see y'all there.